If you ever wondered how you pollinate a giant pumpkin, or maybe you want to pollinate a zucchini plant, you need to get a male flower, and then you need to pollinate the female flower with the pollen from the male flower. And that will give you a fruit set. And so your zucchini or your giant pumpkin would develop from there. So it's early in the morning. We want to go out and see if we have a female flower in the garden, which I think we will. And we're going to cover that flower temporarily and gather some male flowers and wait for about an hour or so until, for me, about 8 o'clock, and that's when I like to pollinate, but you can do it any time in the morning. So let's go see if the female flower is ready and cover her so that bees don't bring in just random pollen. Okay? All right, let's go see. Here she is. So we want to cover her. You can see that it's a female fruit because you actually can see, the female little pumpkin that is already starting to grow, but the flower is open, and we'll be putting some pollen on that flower here in about an hour or so. I like to let it get open all the way, but to keep bees from getting inside there and bringing just any kind of pollen. It could be butternut squash, or it could be spaghetti squash or zucchini. We want to keep that pollen out of there. We're going to cover it until we put our specific pollen. Okay, so this plant is a giant squash plant. It's a nice green squash, and I want to cross it with one of my daughter's plants, a 338 cool squash plant that she grew about 4 years ago. So we're going to go gather some male flowers, and we're going to let them open up all the way and in the house where it's a little warmer, and then we're going to bring them back out and apply that pollen. Okay, so we can make a specific cross this morning. All right, so let's go gather some pollen. So my other squash plant that I want to use the male pollen for, the 338, is just down here. Whoops. We got a couple male flowers here. Oh yeah, here we go. There's no fruit on the bottom of that. It's just a little male flower, and it will have all the pollen we need for that big squash. And we're gonna set that here and get the other one. And that's all we have on this specific plant. So you can tell this flower is a spent flower. It'd be no good. The pollen, it's too old, and water has washed it out. And these are in perfect condition. So, okay. That's a beautiful male flower, isn't it? All that powdery pollen in there is the next generation of pumpkins. Or it could be squash, or it could be zucchini. So we just got back in from outside and gathered pollen from 3 different plants that we wanted to use in our pollination this morning. So we have 2 squash plants that we can pollinate. So our options on pollen is a 1445.5 jutras. That's this flower here. It's a nice large flower. The plant's very vigorous. Good plant. We'll use this pollen. The smaller one here comes from a smaller plant. It's the 338 that we grew years ago. It's a nice squash plant. I love the color. And as you can tell, the blossoms are relatively small. Now, it's where I collected the blossoms, near the stump, and a little pocket of growth that comes off the main. Generally, they're much larger, but the pollen will work. Here we have another set of pollen, and this is from a 1,400 pound giant squash as well. And we've got them kind of warming up just a little. I like to do that for and this is my personal preference, for to at least about 8 here, when the female flower seems to be more receptive or more open for pollen. I also have an example of larger, sometimes these squash plants and pumpkin plants can make some really large male flowers. I'm going to move these off to the side just a little bit so you can see a flower that was taken from what I call the precious, and it was our 825.5 giant beautiful fruit. And I'll show you a picture of that later, but I'm going to open this up. I have never opened this up. This is the first time since we picked this flower. And I think it was 2012. It's been in the freezer. Okay, that's how old this is. And you're actually seeing that firsthand. This is it. So this is the male flower of the precious. And you can see how much larger this flower is in particular. Here's another one. This squash plant was a beast of a plant, and this is a normal, I stuck in there a normal field pumpkin male flower. These are normal field pumpkin male flowers, and here's our giant squash. So they can get really big, and I'll keep that and go back to memory lane of pollinating the state record giant squash that we grew many years ago, and just hope that today, when we go out and pollinate, that we'll be able to maybe replicate a giant squash and pull off that magic again. So, looks pretty good. I'm going to take one of the male flowers, and I'm going to remove the petals to the male flower. And I'm going to do that to expose stamen, to get the pollen. And I don't want any of that on there. I don't want moisture. So a lot of times I'll just kind of go around like that and get that moisture off there. Don't want any water in there. And use this as my pollinator. I'm going to reach down inside with my male flower. I'm going to roll that around the pistil. And you can see I have multiple lobes in there with the female flower. And I'm just going to roll that around in there. Get that covered as much as we can all the way down. Try to be gentle. Get out of there, Mr. B. Go get one of my zucchinis. You can have as much zucchini nectar and pollen as you'd like. Of course, I'm not the master of pollination, but I sure do enjoy it, and it's very rewarding to be able to help with the process. If you don't have sperm meat egg, you have no new life. Sexual reproduction and variation is what gives us, Earth's wonderful biodiversity. And to be a participant in that is a lot of fun in the garden. So there you go. We're going to seal her up. Grow big and grow green. I'm going to show you another technique, and that is you can use a Q-tip. So you can rub the Q-tip right over the anther, and you can see how the pollen is being picked up by the fibers of the Q-tip. A lot of people use this action as well. You want to gather as much of that pollen as you possibly can. If that female flower is receptive, when I roll this around on her, some of that will come off. So I'm going to put this back down inside. It allows you to get down more towards the base of the flower. See, as I'm rolling that down around the flower. Sure enough, lot of that's coming off. I'm going to put the cup back on. Keep that away from our little bee friends. And what I'll do is I'll put a little cooler on top of it and put some ice under there because it's going to be over 95 degrees today, and I like to keep it around the mid-70s, the temperature of the flower, even though it could be 100 degrees outside. And so by putting that little ice chest over the top, a little bag of ice, or maybe a water bottle that's frozen, will help you keep your temperatures in a good range for pollination to work.